The Lily Wave. The Lily Wave frequency is a secret military application known as the Madness Frequency. The Los Angeles riots of 1992 are said to be the first open test of its capacity to mass control anger and a violent mob response. In short, the Lily Wave is best described as targeting resonance of the brain's molecules. The use of the Lily Wave can pretty much install any brainwave pattern into the mind of any targeted human. The Lily Wave, also known as Twin Inverted Pulse Radar, which is TWIPR, or Balanced Bidirectional Pulse Pair, was invented by John C. Lilly, MD, while he was working for the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, under the U.S. Navy in the late 1950s. The Lily Wave is a carrier wave. Microwaves, IR, visible light, UV, X-ray, and gamma rays that send out two pulses in rapid succession, the second pulse being a phased inverted mirror image of the first, phase conjunct mirroring. The Lily Wave leaves nerve ions intact, thus bypassing the mind's subconscious defense system so the body and mind do not mount a defense. The Lily Wave is a biphasic electric pulse that stimulates the neurons of the brain to resonate at a certain frequency. Thus, the Lily Wave has the ability to control the brainwave patterns of the brain. The molecules within the brain can be made to resonate at a desired frequency, thus causing the electrons that comprise the brain's electrical voltages to also resonate at that same frequency. Dr. Lilly developed a new electrical waveform to balance the current, first in one direction and then, after a brief interval, in the other. Thus, ions moving in the neurons would first be pushed one way, then quickly the other way, stimulating the neurons and leaving the ions in their former positions within the neurons. This new waveform was called a balanced bidirectional pulse pair, or the Lily Wave. Police, intelligence operatives, and the U.S. Navy use a Lily Wave to locate surveillance bugs and remote-controlled brains. Once resistance is removed, any emotion or information can be transmitted to the target brain via ultrasonic and electromagnetic wavelengths from FM, TV, telephone, and wireless. By stimulating the neurons of the brain to resonate at a certain frequency, brain patterns can be read and controlled. No need for electrodes or implants to entrain the brain's water molecules, the body's blood sugar, or iron in the cells. Any waveform that can penetrate the skull can be used to entrain the brain's water molecules because we are resonant beings. But now all can be remotely pulsed. All that's needed are electromagnetic and acoustic waves. But if the wave is not biphasic like the Lily Wave, the brain will be damaged. The technical problem in chronic brain stimulation is to stay above the excitatory threshold and below the injury threshold of the neuronal system under consideration. The result can be achieved most easily by the proper choice of waveforms and their time courses, and less easily by the choice of the range of repetition frequencies and train durations. The previous waveforms used in neuropsychology and neurosurgery injured the neurons when unidirectional current passed through the brain. While traveling around taking power grid measurements, scientist Patrick Flanagan, PhD, monitored ground and power lines with oscilloscopes and discovered that Homeland Security black boxes at utilities were producing Lily waves that were stacking ultrasonic waveform pulses on 60 hertz alternating current waves in people's homes. And that's happening today. Okay.
Since he never left the Desert Inn, he needed a team of executive assistants and advisors to oversee his business dealings. This team was led by a man named Frank Gay, who was curiously known as Bill. Gay was a Mormon that Hughes had hired right out of UCLA. Hughes preferred working with Mormons because he knew they didn't drink, smoke, or gamble. He thought this made them more likely to avoid being tempted by the vices of Vegas and handle his business with greater discretion and integrity. Hughes was so committed to using Mormons that they wound up composing the entirety of Gay's team. The group quickly became known around town as the Mormon Mafia. By the mid-1960s, Las Vegas was heavily influenced by people who were either members of or associated with various American mafias. While Mormon businessmen had been the ones to encourage the growth of the relatively shady gambling business, they were simultaneously concerned about what it was doing to the city's image. They eventually realized that the solution was to arrange for the mob-owned casinos to be purchased by someone with a more legitimate image, someone like Howard Hughes. Worried that if his involvement was generally known, he would get gouged on the purchase prices, Hughes' casino buying spree was ultimately enabled by E. Perry Thomas, who would pose as the buyer in Hughes' stead.
And Howard Hughes is the guy that Richard Nixon contacted to set up the assassination team to kill Castro and Che Guevara. And the bottom line is that's the group that killed the president. And that's what the Watergate burglary was all about, is Nixon was terrified that they were going to find out that, because Larry O'Brien had worked for Howard Hughes, that Larry O'Brien may have found out that Nixon is the one who created the assassination team that ended up killing the president. And that if that ever got out, that nobody would believe that he wasn't behind killing the president, which he wasn't. But he was behind trying to kill Castro. And it was that same unit that killed the president in '63. Felix Rodriguez is a shooter. He's one of the guys on the team that killed the president. He and Rafael Chichi Quintero.
I'm going to interview him tomorrow.
Oh, well, that's who he is. You know, Felix Rodriguez, he'll know exactly who I am, because he was the number one guy at Ilopango, running the Contra weapons supply operations, along with Rafael Chichi Quintero. He and Rafael Quintero were in the security division at Pemex in Mexico City, where all the assassins hung out in Operation Condor. He's a cold-blooded fucking killer.
Or could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings? And people say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms. Which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
How interesting. I never heard of that.
Well, I think that's a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood. And I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was in fact a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was in fact a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized than
But no, I mean, we were working, in a collegial setting. And it was kind of like, tried this and whatnot. We use him as I think, a really remarkable example. Another one we put on a UFO and was able to report like he had been abducted. In this case where he had not been, but UFO sightings were, popular at the time, particularly abduction scenario. So that was one where, again, changing history could cause a new scenario and be able to describe the situation just as if it were real.
Was that an experiment, or was there a practical use for that?
No, that was, I hate to say experiment. A lot of this was, I mean, it wasn't consciously what we set up to do. It was more serendipitous. Here's the events. Who are we working with? What can we do? Who wants to, we were literally making it up as we went along.
However, in Aquino's case, he was not on board with the comparative lack of literally worshipping Satan, and split off into a theistic satanic sect, the Temple of Set. He formed the Temple of Set with his wife Lilith, who ran a New York coven called the Lilith Grotto. This is her. Side note, pictures of these two together are invariably hilarious. There's a lot of bad things to be said about Michael Aquino, but credit where credit is due, I can't fault him for having a thing for the Goths. Now, on to the third major aspect of him. Wait. So you're telling me that in addition to being the father of modern psychological warfare and coining the term psyop, this dork is also the LeBron James of child abuse? Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. But look at them. Those don't look like the eyebrows of a satanic pedophile. All right, now time to get into the much darker side of the video.
I have performed an experiment with over 100 people in fabricating what I call telepathic contactees. A very large percentage of these people have seen UFOs shortly after going through a training program.
They're told.
By who?
By the voices, the V2K. So they'll say, we're the Russian government, we're the Chinese government, we're evil aliens, we're Satan's, satanic ritual abuse. And I've heard all the stories. My interview with Len, he very well described a typical breakdown script that's used on almost all the TI victims. TI stands for targeted individuals. Some of them are pretty crazy. They have names like Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, and those are the confusion tactics. And when they're breaking down the ego of the human through all the pains and tortures and the verbal breakdown, these are typical CIA torture scripts. I mean, Kubark manual. And they do good cop, bad cop interrogation called Jeff and Mutt, and they go right through the list, right? Just textbook. So whoever the handlers are on the other side of this synthetic telepathy, they're following the handbook perfectly, and they've been trained.
We've spun a number of companies and sold a number of companies that we started out of my lab. Two of them are actually on NASDAQ.
You're a Stanford professor, an immunologist doing medical research and building companies, and all of a sudden one day the CIA shows up at your office?
I mean, like I said, at first I thought it was a joke. I really thought that somebody was about to put me on candid camera and make a joke of it. But as they started showing me the data, and they were deadly serious, I tried to lure them into making a joke about it. They were deadly serious about it because they had basically said at that point, people have died. And then they showed me some brain images of individuals who'd been damaged, and internal scarring you can see through MRIs. And, it's data. It's unmistakable. You have to say, okay, well, what did that? I can conjecture or hypothesize about, is it the Russians, is it UFOs or whatever? But the fact is, there is data that says something is happening, and so we need to study it. And that's what a scientist should do.
So, of course. Oh, absolutely. But so for some context, who were these people?
All of the anomalies about the pieces of magnesium coming from Ubatuba. But what about the other sample on the table? Those are pieces of bismuth. Nolan actually couldn't recall how it was procured, so we had to call Hal Putoff to get the full scoop. Hal.
Hi, Hal.
Dr. Hal Putoff has one of the most interesting careers of all time. He was first a laser physicist, and then out of Stanford Research Institute, he started the government's psychic spy program. Since then, he's been doing frontier tech research and has briefed multiple presidents on UFOs.
So do you know the original story of how it was kind of procured initially?
The story was that it was sent anonymously by someone claiming to be an Army officer.
Long story short, this Army officer was going through his grandfather's archives when he found this rare sample.
And then written in the diary was that it was a piece from Roswell.
True or not, these thin layers of bismuth magnesium are very hard to reproduce. Hal claims that they even have the properties to micro-size waveguides for terahertz frequencies.
It turns out that it reduces the size of the required microwave guide for terahertz frequencies down to about 1/30th of the wavelength, which is amazing.
However, I neglected to include metallic samples of the exterior of the crashed Roswell disk. I now include the enclosed and can only say that these scrapings came from the exterior underside of the disk. An electrical engineer and physicist, Travis Taylor, at the Army's Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, called me up and said he would volunteer to do such an experiment, but he said first that he had to ask his superiors and contacts, who were the Defense Intelligence Agency.
And predictions coming out of general relativity, so that's not the issue.
It was Kit Green, who is
he's part of
close to those people.
He's part of their extended network. You know, he worked with them exclusively, very closely in the past. You know, he was involved in Putoff's remote viewing work, you know, all this stuff that happened in the 70s.
Right. There was an official program to study UFOs. As the I-Team first reported, one of the Pentagon programs was carried out here by BASS, a subcontractor within Bigelow Aerospace, financed by the DIA. And the chief scientist for BASS was physicist Dr. Hal Putoff.
Hal was working with the DIA study through BASS, and as well as the chief scientific officer for the two stars as a civilian effort in the field.
So yeah,
I should mention he was also participated in the study that I ran 30 years ago.
Las Vegan John Alexander, a former military intelligence colonel, has likewise been pursuing the UFO mystery for decades. It's no accident he invited Dr. Putoff to speak here, given the recent explosion of media interest in the Pentagon's UFO study. On Friday, Putoff will tell what he knows about that study. It's one of the highlights from the joint conference of IRVA, the International Remote Viewing Association, and SSE, the Society for Scientific Exploration. Both groups include professionals who believe the study of unconventional subjects is a worthy pursuit.
That is the key point, is that these people are highly credible, highly skilled, many professors, lots of PhDs and MDs that are involved, and they do want to look at or are certainly willing to look at this wide range of society. They're not all proponents. I mean that. I mean, some of them are true skeptics, but you know, they are willing to look at the data.
The conference is not a gathering of true believers. For example, one SSE member, Dr. Gary Nolan of Stanford, recently demolished claims by pitchmen that this skeleton found in Chile is a mummified extraterrestrial. It's a deformed human, Nolan proved. Remote viewing is a protocol developed for the CIA and tested by the U.S. Army. Dr. Putoff helped create the CIA's remote viewing program, but for this event, we'll focus on the Pentagon's UFO studies.
So when people say, isn't it interesting the Pentagon is doing this, my question is, why aren't we seeing more?
George Knapp, 8 News Now.
But there are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
There are explicit programs of DARPA to read and write to human brains, whether it's through direct implants within the brain or wearing some kind of cap. So these things are being worked on, and we know that.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp, that would be the ultimate technological achievement that would fall into this realm of mind control and direct human-machine interface that DARPA may well want to keep secret.
The Lily wave frequency is a secret military application known as the madness frequency.